The heavy oak doors of the Thorne Estate Library seemed to groan as the family lawyer, Mr. Sterling, adjusted his spectacles. My stepmother, Beatrice, sat draped in designer silk, her eyes red from a performance of grief that deserved an Oscar. Beside her, my stepbrother, Julian, checked his Rolex, his smirk barely hidden. They hadn't spoken a word to me in the 3 days since my father's funeral, except to tell me which chairs I wasn't allowed to sit in. I sat in the back, the quiet son, the one who had spent the last 5 years actually caring for Dad while they were off spending his money in Aspen and Dubai. I was the one who recorded his physical therapy sessions, the one who knew the names of his nurses, and the one who held his hand when the monitors finally went flat. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. Regarding the distribution of the estate of Thomas Thorne, to my wife, Beatrice, I leave the primary residence, the Cayman accounts, and all personal effects. Beatrice let out a practiced sob. To my stepson, Julian, I leave the chairmanship of Thorne Logistics and the fleet of vehicles. Julian pumped a fist silently. Then Sterling looked at me. His expression was a mix of pity and confusion. To my biological son, Elias, I leave the contents of the rusted toolbox in the garden shed and the permanent right to the junk-filled storage room in the basement. He is to be vacated from all other areas of this estate within 24 hours. Julian burst out laughing. A toolbox? Dad really knew your worth, Elias. You're the help, always have been. Beatrice stood up, her face instantly cold. You heard the will, Elias. You have 1 day to take your trash and leave. Don't let the gate hit you on the way out of a life you don't belong to. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I simply stood up and straightened my tie. I had expected the betrayal, but the cruelty was a fresh sting. As I walked toward the basement door, Julian tripped me, sending me sprawling onto the marble floor. Clean that up before you leave, heir of the basement, Julian sneered. I got up, brushed off my knees, and headed down the stairs. They thought they had stripped me of everything. They thought the basement was my prison. But as I reached into my pocket, I felt the small silver key my father had pressed into my palm moments before his heart stopped. I reached the storage room door and turned the lock. The room was filled with old crates and dust, just as they thought. But I wasn't looking for heirlooms. I was looking for the truth. I pushed aside a heavy stack of old ledgers, and that's when I saw it, a seam in the concrete floor that didn't match the rest of the room. I spent the night in that damp basement, surrounded by the ghosts of my father's past. Upstairs, I could hear the muffled thumping of bass. Beatrice and Julian were already throwing a celebration party. They were popping vintage champagne that my father had saved for a special occasion, toasted to the fact that they had finally cut the quiet one out of the picture. To them, I was a ghost. For 5 years, I was the one who managed Dad's medications, filed his taxes, and kept the household running while they treated the mansion like a hotel. They saw my silence as weakness. They saw my attention to detail as the trait of a servant. They never noticed the encrypted email backups I kept, or the way I meticulously logged every time Beatrice replaced Dad's heart medication with sugar pills in his final weeks. I knelt on the cold floor, prying at the concrete seam with a crowbar from the inheritance toolbox Dad had left me. My hands were shaking. My father was a man of layers. He knew Beatrice was a viper, but he was a man of law. He needed me to be the one to find the evidence. Finally, the slab shifted. Beneath it wasn't a dirt hole, but a high-tech, reinforced steel safe with a biometric scanner in a physical keyhole. I inserted the silver key. Click. Then I placed my thumb on the scanner. "Access granted," a mechanical voice whispered. The heavy door swung open, revealing not gold or jewelry, but rows of neatly organized sealed envelopes, a flash drive, and a blue ledger. On top of the pile was a handwritten letter in my father's shaky script. "Elias, if you are reading this, they have shown their true faces. They think they won the sprint, but they don't know you were born for the marathon. Inside this safe is the real Thorne Logistics. The one they have is a hollow shell of debt. This is the truth they tried to kill me for." I opened the blue ledger. It wasn't just a record of money, it was a record of every bribe Beatrice had paid and every contract Julian had forged. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't just an outcast, I was the owner of the evidence that could dismantle their entire world. Just then, the basement door creaked open. Julian stood there, holding a bottle of tequila, his eyes glassy and malicious. "Still playing in the dirt, Elias? I told you to get out. Now I'm going to make sure you leave with nothing, including your teeth."
Julian stepped into the room, his shadow stretching long across the concrete. Behind him stood two of the security guards he'd hired this morning, basically hired thugs to ensure my eviction went smoothly. "What's this?" Julian said, his eyes landing on the open safe in the floor. His drunken smirk vanished, replaced by a greedy glint. "You little rat, you found Dad's secret stash? Move aside." "It's mine, Julian," I said, my voice low and steady. I didn't move. I tucked the flash drive into my inner pocket. The will specifically stated the contents of this storage room belong to me. That includes the safe. Julian laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "The will says whatever I want it to say now that Dad's gone. Boys, take the contents of that safe and throw this heir out into the street. If he resists, consider it trespassing." The two thugs moved forward. I was never a fighter in the traditional sense, but I had spent years practicing Krav Maga in the hours they thought I was just running errands for Dad. More importantly, I was calm. Anger makes you slow. Precision makes you fast. The first guard lunged, reaching for my throat. I stepped inside his guard, using his momentum to drive my elbow into his solar plexus. As he gasped for air, I swept his leg, sending him crashing into a stack of old crates. The second guard pulled a telescopic baton, but I didn't wait. I grabbed a heavy wrench from the toolbox Dad left me, the worthless gift, and parried the strike. Julian backed away, his face pale. You're going to jail for this." "I'm defending my property, Julian," I said, stepping over the groaning guard. "You should check the laws on castle doctrine in this state. It's very specific." I grabbed the sealed envelope in the ledger, slamming the safe shut. Before the thugs could recover, I sprinted for the secondary exit, a coal chute Dad had shown me when I was 10. I slid through the narrow opening and into the rainy night, the mud caking my suit. I stood in the shadows of the estate, watching the lights of the party upstairs. I had no home, no money in my wallet, and the police would likely be looking for me within the hour. But I had the flash drive. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Mr. Henderson, this is Elias Thorne. I have the accountant ledger and the CCTV footage from the night of the 14th. We need to move the hearing to tomorrow morning." "Elias?" The old lawyer's voice crackled. "Be careful. They just filed an emergency injunction claiming you stole $5 million from the company safe." By 6 a.m., my face was on the local news. "Police search for Elias Thorne, son of the late tycoon Thomas Thorne, wanted for grand larceny and assault." Beatrice had played her hand perfectly. She didn't just kick me out, she branded me a criminal. She gave a tearful interview in front of the mansion, claiming I had attacked her and Julian in a drug-fueled rage because I was jealous of the inheritance. I was sitting in a corner booth of a 24-hour diner, my hoodie pulled low. My laptop was open, connected to the diner's spotty Wi-Fi. I wasn't looking at the news, I was looking at the flash drive. It was a gold mine. It contained email chain backups between Beatrice and a man named Victor Vane, the CEO of a rival logistics company. They weren't just lovers, they were conspirators. They'd been funneling Thorne Logistics contracts into Vane's company for years, bleeding my father dry. But there was something even sinister. I found a folder titled Medical. Inside were scanned copies of Dad's real blood tests. They showed high levels of arsenic. My father wasn't just sick, he was being slowly poisoned. And the doctor who signed off on it? Julian's college roommate. My hand shook, but not from fear, from a cold, white-hot rage. They didn't just steal his company, they stole his life. Suddenly, the diner doors swung open. 2 police officers walked in, holding their morning coffee. They started scanning the booths. I didn't panic. I closed my laptop and slid a $20 bill under my plate. I walked toward the restroom, but instead of entering, I slipped out the kitchen service door. I needed to get to the courthouse. The board of directors was meeting at 10 a.m. to officially vote Julian as CEO and finalize the merger with Vane's company. If that vote happened, the evidence would be buried under a mountain of corporate restructuring. I hailed a cab 3 blocks away. "The Justice Center," I told the driver. "You look like that kid on the news," the driver said, squinting in the rearview mirror. "I get that a lot," I replied, my voice flat. "I'm the one who's going to clear his name." As we pulled up to the courthouse, I saw the black SUVs. Beatrice and Julian were arriving like royalty, surrounded by cameras and high-priced lawyers. I stepped out of the cab, but before I could reach the steps, a hand grabbed my shoulder. It was the security guard from the basement, his face bruised, holding a pair of handcuffs.
"Got you, you little thief," the guard hissed. He tried to shove me toward a waiting unmarked car, but I didn't resist. Instead, I raised my voice, loud enough for the crowd of reporters to hear. "Officer, thank God you're here. I'm Elias Thorne, and I've been trying to turn myself in to the district attorney's office regarding the Thorne murder investigation." The word murder hit the air like a lightning bolt. The reporters turned their cameras toward us instantly. The guard froze. He wasn't a real cop, just private security in a convincing suit. In front of 50 cameras, he couldn't exactly kidnap me. "I have the evidence," I shouted, holding up the sealed envelope. 2 real police officers assigned to courthouse security stepped in, separating me from the guard. "What's this about a murder, kid?" "My father, Thomas Thorne. I have the forensic toxicology reports and the original will," I said, my voice projecting with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. "I demand to be taken to Judge Miller's chambers immediately. This is a matter of corporate espionage and homicide." Beatrice, standing on the courthouse steps, turned pale. Julian looked like he was about to vomit. Their lead lawyer tried to intervene, but the police were already escorting me inside. 10 minutes later, I was in a private hearing room. Judge Miller, a woman known for being the Iron Gavel, looked at me with deep skepticism. Beatrice and her legal team sat across from me, looking indignant. "Mr. Thorne," said the judge, "you are currently wanted for theft. Why should I listen to a word you say?" "Because, Your Honor," I opened the blue ledger, "the theft I committed was taking my own property. Here is the deed to the basement storage room and its contents, signed by my father and notarized a year ago. And here," I slid a document across the table, "is the DNA test paper my father had performed in secret 3 months ago." Beatrice let out a sharp intake of breath. "What does a DNA test have to do with a will?" the judge asked. "It proves that Julian is not Thomas Thorne's son. And more importantly, I have the marriage nullification papers from my father's safe. My father discovered Beatrice was never legally divorced from her first husband in Nevada. Her marriage to my father was bigamy. It was void from day one." The room went silent. The judge looked at the papers, then at Beatrice. "Mrs. Thorne, care to explain why there are 2 active marriage certificates for you in 2 different states?" Beatrice's lawyer scrambled, whispering frantically in her ear. She looked like a cornered animal, her elegant facade cracking. "This is a fabrication," she shrieked. "He forged those. He's a tech geek. He can make anything on a computer." The judge looked her coldly. "These are notarized originals, Mrs. Thorne. The court can verify the Nevada records in 5 minutes. If this is true, you have no legal standing as a spouse, and Julian has no claim as an heir under the biological children clause of the public will." Julian slammed his hand on the table. "This is bullshit. I've been his son for 20 years. "Perhaps, legally," I said, leaning forward, "but Dad knew. He knew everything. That's why he left me the worthless basement. He knew you'd be too arrogant to check it and too greedy to let me stay there. He baited the trap, and you walked right into it." "There's still the matter of the company," Julian sneered, trying to regain his footing. "I'm the chairman. The board is voting right now. Even if the will is contested, the corporate bylaws say I'm in charge." "Actually," I said, pulling out the flash drive,
I'd like to show the court a specific email chain backup. It's from Julian's private server. It discusses the merger with Vane Logistics. Specifically, it discusses the $5 million kickback Julian and Beatrice received to tank Thorn Logistics' stock price so Vane could buy it for pennies. The judge leaned in. That is a very serious accusation, Mr. Thorn. I have the bank routing numbers, and I have the audio file recorded by my father's bedside. He wasn't sleeping when you two were discussing how much arsenic to put in his tea, Beatrice. He was recording you on his phone, the phone you thought you destroyed, but which I backed up to the cloud every single night. I pressed play on my laptop. The room filled with my father's weak, rasping breath, followed by Beatrice's unmistakable voice. Just another week, Julian. The doctor says his heart can't take much more. Then the company is ours, and we can finally get rid of that pathetic boy, Elias. Beatrice slumped into her chair. Julian turned to run for the door. Lock the doors, Judge Miller commanded, and call the district attorney, now.
Julian didn't get far. 2 bailiffs intercepted him at the door, forcing him back into his seat. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from a civil hearing to a criminal battlefield. "Your Honor," Beatrice's lawyer said, his voice trembling, My client needs medical attention. She's clearly under extreme stress." "Sit down, counselor," Judge Miller snapped. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "Mr. Thorn, you've presented a staggering amount of evidence, but there is one thing I don't understand. If your father had all this proof, why didn't he go to the police while he was alive?" "Because he was being watched 24/7, I explained. They controlled his food, his visitors, and his phone. He knew if he moved against them openly, they would kill him immediately and hide the evidence. He had to play the part of the dying, oblivious old man while he funneled everything to me in secret. He knew I was the only one they underestimated enough to let into the room." I felt a lump in my throat. My father had endured months of slow poisoning just to ensure I had the weapons to destroy them. It wasn't just an inheritance, it was a sacrifice. Suddenly, the door to the chamber burst open. A man in a sharp gray suit walked in. It was Victor Vane, the CEO of Vane Logistics. He looked unfazed by the chaos. "Your Honor," Vane said, his voice like silk, "I apologize for the interruption, but I am here as a primary creditor of Thorn Logistics. Regardless of the family drama, Thorn Logistics owes my firm $40 million in defaulted loans signed by Julian Thorn as chairman. I am here to begin the immediate seizure of all company assets, including this estate." Beatrice looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Victor, tell them!" Vane didn't even look at her. He was a shark. He didn't care about Beatrice. He just wanted the empire. "The paperwork is iron tight, Judge. The company is mine. Elias can have his basement, but the walls around it belong to Vane Logistics." Julian started to laugh hysterically. "You hear that, Elias? We won the battle, but we burned the kingdom down. You get nothing." I looked at Vane, then I looked at the judge. I reached into the sealed envelope one last time and pulled out a single golden-bordered document. "Mr. Vane," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence, "I was wondering when you'd show up. I've been tracking your loans for months. Highly illegal predatory lending, by the way. But that's a conversation for the SEC." Vane scoffed. "The loans are legal. The signatures are real. I own Thorn Logistics." "You own the name Thorn Logistics," I corrected. I held up the golden-bordered document. "This is the original deed paper for the parent company, Thorn Global Holdings. It was founded by my grandfather. There is a specific hidden clause in the bylaws, Article 12, Section 4. I handed the document to Judge Miller. "The clause states," I continued, "that in the event of any attempted hostile takeover or predatory debt acquisition by a competitor, all intellectual property, contracts, and physical assets of Thorn Logistics immediately revert to the Thorn Heritage Trust. This trust is an entity that cannot be sold, mortgaged, or used as collateral." Vane's smile faltered. "That's an archaic rule. It wouldn't hold up in modern court."
It does when the trust is the majority shareholder, and as of my 25th birthday last month, I am the sole trustee of the Thorn Heritage Trust. My father didn't leave me nothing in the will. He couldn't leave me the company because Julian would have fought it, so he just let the company fail into the trust that I already owned. Judge Miller read the document, her eyebrows rising. Mr. Vane, it appears you've been lending money to a shell corporation that had no legal right to its own assets. Your $40 million debt is against Julian Thorne personally, not the company. Vane turned to Julian, his face turning a dark, bruised purple. You told me the assets were cleared. I didn't know, I stammered. I stood up and walked over to Vane. I was a head shorter than him, but in that moment I felt like a giant. You tried to steal a dying man's legacy, Victor. Now you're $40 million in the hole to a guy who's about to go to prison for conspiracy to murder. Good luck collecting. Vane turned and stormed out of the room, his empire crumbling with every step. Now, I said, turning back to the judge, I believe there's the matter of the arsenic.
The police had seen enough. Handcuffs were clicked onto Beatrice and Julian's wrists right there in the judge's chambers. Beatrice was screaming about her rights, while Julian just stared at the floor, the reality of a life sentence finally sinking in. But as they were being let out, the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, the one I had called the night before, walked in. He looked pale, holding a thin, yellowed piece of paper. "Elias," he whispered, "I just got the results back from the forensic ink test on the will Beatrice presented." "We already know it's fake, Harold," I said, feeling the weight of the day finally lifting. "The DNA and the marriage records prove that." "No," Henderson said, his voice trembling. "You don't understand. The will she presented, the one that gave her everything, it wasn't just forged. It was signed after your father was already dead." I froze. "What?" "The ink hadn't even fully cured when it was filed," Henderson explained. "But more importantly, I found the second hidden page of your father's real will, the one he hid inside the lining of that worthless toolbox." He handed me the paper. I read it, and my heart stopped. "To my son, Elias, you have the evidence now. You have the company. But there is one final truth you must know. Beatrice didn't just kill me, she killed your mother too. The accident 20 years ago wasn't an accident. Check the basement safe again. There is a hidden compartment behind the false back. The brake line photos are there." I felt the world tilt. My mother's death, the event that had shattered my father and turned him into a shell of a man, had been their first crime. This wasn't just about money. This was 20 years of cold-blooded murder. I looked at Beatrice as she was being dragged past me. She looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see a stepmother. I saw a monster. She gave a chilling, jagged smile. "You think you won, Elias? You're just like him. You'll die in that house, alone, just like your father." "Maybe," I said, my voice cracking, "but I'll die with a clean conscience, something you never understand." I turned back to the safe's contents. There was one more thing I hadn't opened, a small velvet box. I stood in the center of the Thorne estate a week later. The house was quiet. The parties were over. The designer furniture had been hauled away as evidence, and the security guards were all behind bars. Beatrice and Julian were awaiting trial for capital murder. With the CCTV footage and the audio files I had provided, the DA was seeking the death penalty. Victor Vane's company had filed for bankruptcy, unable to recover from the massive, fraudulent loans Julian had sucked him into. I opened the velvet box I had found in the safe. Inside was my mother's wedding ring and a small, simple key to a cabin in Maine, the place where my parents had been the happiest. I walked back down to the basement one last time. I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I didn't feel like the quiet son who had been stepped on. I felt like the man my father knew I could be. I sat on the edge of the rusted toolbox and looked at the empty safe in the floor. My phone buzzed. It was a message from the board of directors. Mr. Thorne, the stock has stabilized. We are waiting for your arrival to begin the reorganization. The company is yours. I typed back a simple reply. Sell the mansion. Donate the proceeds to the hospital's toxicology department. I'll be in the office at 9 a.m. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. I didn't need the marble floors of the designer silks. I had the truth, and I had my father's respect. As I drove through the front gates, I saw the bronze plaque with our family name. People always thought my father was weak for letting Beatrice in. They didn't realize he was just waiting for the only person he could trust to grow up. They called me a nobody. They called me the help. They thought that because I was quiet, I wasn't listening. They thought that because I was humble, I was easy to break. But karma has a way of finding the loudest people in the room and silencing them with the truth. They called me nobody until the judge read my name.